And right now, he needs to find a way to turn things around. It's going to be rapid. He has been a great player. Vincent's played some great chess over the last few days. He needs to keep that going. It's going to be a big switch up from the matches that we just saw. From a best of 2, we move on to a best of 4. So it's a long haul match, David. Fatigue, energy will be a factor, and at least that might at some point favor Vincent. It's once again 2.5 points to win the match, a best of 4, 10 minutes with a 2 seconds increment. Winner gets that first spot to the chess.com grand final. So a lot on the line for the players.
A lot on the line. There's plenty of pride, as well as the fact that they will be staying in the winner's bracket. It's been a long tournament. It's been a long week for these players, literally playing dozens and dozens of games between them. Will youth pay off? That's maybe the one thing on Vincent's side. Magnus, in his interview yesterday, said he was feeling the tiredness start to set in. That being said, Magnus does start with the white pieces, so it's all about the early stages, Tanya. It's a 4-game match, but who will get the first blow in? Italian game on the board. Magnus playing the slow version of the Italian. What do you make of this?
Right now, I'm trying to understand what I make of Magnus's hair. Usually, he shows up extremely sleek and ready. I think he's been having a bit of celebration already right here, but it's time to get back to the chessboard. I think, as you said, David, a slow start. You get a position, you get a middle game, and you fight on. I think this is going to be a long match, and I won't be surprised if this goes down to the wire. It's not going to be easy because I've been so impressed with Vincent's, the opening preparation that he's got on, the confidence with which he's playing in the Champions Chess Tour, and his clock management. And that's going to be key in this one as well.
Yeah, clock management will be key. We talk about the Magnus effect, the psychological kind of difficulties that players have against him. Somehow when you sit across from Magnus, I've been there myself, you start to burn time. You just assume he sees more than you. And often when you're ticking down on the clock, that's when he actually does strike. So I think match strategy, Vincent doing the right thing, playing some really quick moves. Of course, this is the Italian. It's a very fashionable opening at all levels. And Vincent will have seen this himself dozens and dozens of times before. So, kind of an early trade here. Incoming, Tanya. Magnus, though, do you think this is a sign of respect for Vincent that he's playing one of his, his main repertoire pretty much?
And this is such a big line at top level. We see it so much, the Italian being played out, but it's also one of the hardest openings to prepare against because there are always these small deviations. Does white include h3? Does black include h6? Do we see a pawn advance on the queen side? And all these changes happen, and then eventually it's a slow start that tends to explode with a central break. To your question, we do have the trade on the board, so the pawn structure has been compromised. David, in my experience of playing this position with the black pieces, it feels like you should be happy with the f-file opening up, a little pressure on that f2 square, but long term, it is a difficult strategic pawn formation to deal with for black.
Yeah, it is difficult. I've actually seen Magnus against Vincent, Magnus taking advantage long term, deep into the endgame of the lack of flexibility of black's pawns in the center here. If you ever push forward with d5, you might just lose your e-pawn, the front e-pawn on e5. You really don't necessarily want to touch anything. I'm expecting Magnus in the near future to offer a trade of dart squared bishops. But okay, rook to a2, pawn to d5. As far as I know, still relatively kind of well-trodden paths here. But yeah, it's just about who handles it better. You mentioned that you've got some experience on the black side of these positions, Tanya. What do you think of how Vincent's been handling it? What do you foresee in the near future?
I like it. I like the fact that he's managed to get d5 in and the e5 pawn is not on pre, because so much has to do with what attack you can build using that bishop on a7, a bit of a sniper along the diagonal. And if you can successfully try to get knight from f6, h5 to f4, we're talking about a real attack, which is why it's key for Magnus in these positions to keep the queen on this diagonal so that you're looking at ideas, David, of a trade on d5 or picking up the e5 pawn with tactics. But while I'm saying that, I'm wondering if that's actually possible. Can Vincent try to go all out? Because one of the things that you really want to achieve with black after you get d5 in is a knight on f4.
That's the beautiful square, the most beautiful square for a pony if you can get it there. Yeah, knight h5 looks very tempting. It's not a pony anymore. You're right. It's I don't know what it is. It's a Olympic winning prize stallion, as you mentioned. Knight h5, knight f4. There is the option of white playing pawn to g3, which looks really shaky. I guess on the F file, I mean, the queen might line up on F6. There's all sorts of tactics in the air. I get flashbacks now of a Magnus Carlsen against Sergei Karyakin game from the 2016 World Championship, where Black's knight ended up landing on F4, and infamously Magnus went on to win, but was in trouble. Well, maybe in trouble at some point. That could have walked into a draw. I like it. Knight H5. Let's go. Vincent needs to go for his opponent. Needs to attack.
I'm gonna do a Danny here and go like, I know exactly what you're talking about, the flashback. I just got it as well, David.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very niche reference. I shouldn't have dropped that one in there, but same pawn structure. Whenever Black has these pawns, pattern recognition, it's all about, as you say, this F2 pawn. And Vincent doesn't take any risks. He plays queen d6. Maybe he'll get this rook into the game first and then decide whether to try to evolve this knight into a magnificent beast on f4. Yeah, very cagey stuff. I've got to say, I love what Vincent's doing. I think a great start to this game, Tanya.
I agree with you. Usually when you have this pawn structure in the center, it's not so easy for Black to get this d5 break in. And seeing that on the board, it does ask White some questions. And actually, it's Magnus now who's asking a big question because he wants Vincent to take a decision. But this also leaves the b4 pawn a little tender. Watch out for a skewer though. Queen takes pawn, can run into bishop a3, winning more material. That f8 rook will be hanging. So I don't believe that Vincent can start getting greedy just yet.
Oh, every time I say that I like his opponent's position, Magnus seems to just kind of laugh and play a great move. Pawn to c4, really unexpected, not on my radar at all. Just as you say, it's almost invisible, this threat. It's not actually attacked this pawn because it would walk into that skewer you mentioned, Tanya. And if White gets one more move, if he took the pawn, but I was going to say, if White gets to lock things down with pawn to c5, then that Black bishop would have been caught on the edge of the board forever. Now c5 is less tempting because the Black queen will just step back and the root of the pawn chain, the base on b4, would have been broken. So the Black bishop will get out of prison and stay on this diagonal. Just high quality chess, Tanya. Nice move. a5 from Vincent.
And that's the most exceptional part about top players, right? Even with little time on the clock, even in these faster formats, the quality of chess, the accuracy still remains so incredibly high. They just seem to be playing at their best level, regardless of the fact that they need to make the moves quick. And now Magnus needs to make a decision, right? Does he anyway push the c5 pawn, a committal move, because you've got to have a response after you do that? Like you said, b4 under fire. You never want to play a move like b5 here, David, creating all these dark squared weaknesses. That's exactly walking into Vincent's plan. And I saw Vincent there with a bit of a side eye. So he's kind of, I think, checking out how Magnus is feeling. And Magnus gets greedy. He does take the a5 pawn. Usually, I will be very happy with Black because those two pawns long term on the a file are a big weakness for White.
Yeah, I agree. It's really ugly, really counterintuitive what Magnus has done, but Magnus does love his rook's pawns, so inspired by AlphaZero, as we've mentioned, he does hope to someday maybe keep these on the board. Maybe he'll play a move like bishop to d2 right now, make it more difficult for Black to poach those weaknesses. Yeah, Tanya, this looks like a very tense middle game. How impressed are you that Vincent's managed to pick himself up? We mentioned it earlier, 6 losses in a row in the Blitz tournament earlier today to finish things off. Suddenly you're facing the world number 1. That's literally kind of the worst possible scenario, but looks like he's had a great start to this match so far.
And that's the thing, right? We've been seeing a very different Vincent in Poland, and then he just comes and it's a Vincent 2.0. He's been so convincing, so dominating in his matches, and this one as well in their best of 4. To me, it looks like a dream start with Black. Yes, you're down a pawn and you can't immediately win it back, but look at the piece activity. You've got the better structure. The bishop on d2 will be tied down to defending that a5 pawn. The queen and the knight tie down the other rook and the queen, defending the e4 pawn. And they look at that classy move. He's trying to break away the a5 pawn to get to the a4 weakness. I'm very impressed with Vincent's play so far.
Yeah, likewise. Black has nothing at all wrong with his position, apart from the fact that temporarily he's a pawn down. So if he can win that pawn back, I think he's going to be in great shape. Knight e8. And you're right, Tanya. Now you've said it, I can't unsee it. Vincent keeps looking at the camera. He keeps checking out Magnus's expression. You can see his eyes darting away. Hey, knight d6 incoming. Beautiful maneuver. He's going to kick this white rook back and out. And yeah, White's pawns, they're all going to be under fire. Even once the knight lands on d6, e4, as you mentioned, Note how the f files opened up. Watch out for rook takes f3 tactics in the air. Ooh, I really don't like how things are going for white. I think Vincent's just, locked in. He's desperate to put everything right. Bishop takes bishop now. Blue arrow appears, Tanya. The most obvious move, surely.
And at least you regain the material immediately, because with that bishop move, you've lost connection to that a5 pawn. Bishop takes bishop. First question, what do you recapture with? Because watch out, the e4 pawn is tender as well. Bishop takes bishop. Watch out, knight f4 is a very big threat. And if nothing else, you can simply go rook takes pawn next, David, and at least restore material balance with more play, with more attack on white's forces.
That's right. I think just play it safe here. Bishop takes bishop. We mentioned the confidence issue. The one thing that Vincent wants to avoid surely is getting low on time. Blitz was where he kind of fell apart in the Grand Chess Tour out there in Poland. Actually, thinking about it, they're probably like meters away from each other, playing in adjacent rooms out there in the hotel. But Blitz was where it fell apart for Vincent. He needs to keep enough time on the clock to calculate when the going gets tough. I was watching that whole event, and the number of times he had a great position, winning position, and it just slipped away in one move, just a blunder or due to the clock. It was just too much. So that's the only thing I see tripping Vincent up at this point. Rook takes a5. I agree. Simplicity is beautiful. Simplicity is key here, Tanya.
And you also, with that move, would indirectly defend that e5 pawn, so not allowing any knight takes pawn tactics to make sure your center is under control. And meanwhile, e4 pawn to be handled for Magnus. You mentioned that it's a very big possibility that they're playing next to each other, well, in adjacent rooms and rooms next to each other. But I'm going to say it. I think Magnus's room right now looks far more fancy than where Vincent's sitting.
It's the penthouse suite, maybe on the top floor. Poor Vincent.
The presidential suite.
He got a motel on the corner of the road. Like, they're both in Poland. That's all I know. And rook takes a5 is on the board.
And that's the other thing we know. So rook takes pawn. That's nicely played there. Again, once again, defending e5. So Magnus, he wants Vincent to take that rook on b5, right? That would improve his pawn structure. And we've got the move that's being suggested. The more you see it, the more you like it. You put pressure on e5, you defend your e4 pawn, and Vincent might be forced to, in fact, trade on b5 after that on Magnus's turn. And of course, Magnus finds the best move in the position.
Making me eat my words again. Magnus, he's a meanie. Why does he keep doing this? Knight g4, Tanya, like you said, the blue arrow, once it made an appearance, it's so obvious. But to see this from 3-4 moves ago, when Magnus embarked on this bishop exchange and started bringing his knight forward, really classy. Now, Vincent, big threat to face. Does he just neglect this pawn, just say, okay, it's dropping anyway, and just go for some counterattacks with knight f4? Does he just continue trying to ask questions of the white rook? Does he just take this pawn on a4? What would you do? What comes to mind?
I would just wait for Vincent to answer that question, because it's such a difficult decision right now. You want to defend that e5 pawn. Knight f4 is a super tempting move. But to me, the question is, once white moves the queen, you've taken away one more defender from that e5 pawn. It might become really difficult to handle the attack after that. So, but that said, David, I'm looking at lines like knight f4, queen moves, knight takes pawn on h3, the f3 knight is hanging. We might see this position explode if Vincent goes for the idea of knight f4.
Oh, I liked it, Tanya. Yeah, he takes on b5 instead. It does feel like the only way you ever get a chance against Magnus is by attacking him. Positional battles like this one, where it's all about strategy, where to put pieces, what pawns to attack. Magnus is the king. And this just looks difficult. I'm looking at ideas like, not queen to c2, mouse slip, queen to a2, I meant to draw, to attack the e6 pawn in the near future. Your knight f4 is still on the cards, though, so a bit scary. Maybe Magnus will aim to trade off queens. What do you think here? He's up on time, Magnus. We said this might be a likely scenario. How do you see the next few moves going down?
I'm loving the position, and I see your bar seems to say it's advantage Magnus, but practically speaking, with all these threats that exist, always rook takes knight is a massive sacrifice that you need to watch out for. Even moves like queen to a2, I would already start calculating what actually happens after rook takes knight. Yes, there's a check on e6, but I don't believe that's the end of the line. So there's so much to really think about in this position. Black's queen, super active. The knight, once it lands on f4, would be active. And look at that, Magnus wants to trade off Currently, the most active piece that Vincent has. It's an endgame, and that's bad news for anyone that plays Magnus Carlsen.
Oh dear, I sense the worst. Like we saw yesterday in that match against Denis Lazovic, Magnus is an endgame magician. It's well known. He's just the best endgame player in history. I think that's beyond debate at this point. And look at this, he suddenly quickly switches his attack, his focus towards the c7 pawn, the base of Black's pawn chain. e5 is not running away anytime soon. That's easy pickings in the next few turns. I'm surprised Vincent traded queens so quickly and so confidently. Maybe he had to, maybe there was no choice, but good tip for everyone at home. If you sense your opponent has one strong piece, the rest of their army is passive, trade off their strong piece. And more often than not, you are left with an advantage with what remains. So I like how you explained that, Tanya. Okay, do you think Vincent has a chance of saving this? Under 3 minutes now, looking tricky suddenly.
If there was any other player who was playing with white, I would say a big yes, because you're still putting pressure, right? Not only attacking the e4 pawn, that rook from f8 can slide over to that a8 square and start targeting the a4 pawn at the right point as well. The knight from g6, once again, defending e5 for now, but always eyeing that f4 square, and I think we've got moves on the board. So rook a8 played, Vincent immediately goes for the a4 pawn. It's the pawn structure that Black has that I'm worried about, and it feels like the pawns are coming under attack one by one and a bit too quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's deja vu for Vincent. He actually loves this pawn structure. I've seen countless games, Vincent having these doubled e-pawns, but there have been examples of exactly what's happening now. Just recurring, where queens get traded, bishops get traded, rooks disappear, and ultimately these pawns just fall off the board. So, okay, at least he's eliminated the whole of white's queen side. That's kind of half the job done, but he's got to make sure he doesn't lose the e-pawn while white keeps the its counterpart, the e4 pawn. So big attack now, Tanya, on the knight, on this pawn. It's very much Black playing for a draw, right? 2-result game.
100%. First, you need to realize or understand where you want to move the knight, and regardless of where you move it, you either lose the e5 pawn or the b6 pawn. So a pleasant choice for Magnus. Picking up either of these two pawns will put pressure on the b5 knight, so not giving Black enough time to capture the central pawn. Without the queens on the board, knight on f4 loses a bit of its horsepower. Things are not going well for Vincent, is my feeling. He's under 2 minutes on the clock, and Magnus is going to try to squeeze this one out.
That's right. Magnus is going to try and squeeze water from a stone here. He'll try anything he can to confuse Vincent, to win a pawn potentially. He grabs the b pawn. That black b pawn was a potential runner. Pass pawns are dangerous in knight endgames, so Magnus removes any risk. But it looks like Vincent will be able to eliminate the e4 pawn. So it's going to be 3 versus 2 on the king side. And good drawing chances, you would say, if rooks disappear. But white's rook looks so active. Black's king not entirely safe. Tanya, prediction, will Vincent hold? Will he achieve his goal here of saving the first game?
And this last move was important because rook check was a big threat attacking that f2 pawn. I want to see Vincent hold this one. I think this should be a big fight. I think Vincent has played this game really well, but we know Magnus's incredible ability to go fishing in a dried up pond and then end up with the catch of the day. He just seems to do that in all these endgames. So it might not be enough what he has, but he's often able to convert. In this particular one, he does have that extra pawn, so that gives him more than what most endgames give Magnus.
Yeah, it's you're right. It's more than what most endgames give. But look at those knights in the center of the board, Tanya, just dancing around. I think we're going to see some knight forks. I think we're going to see some tricks, some wizardry. I'm not sure in whose favor. The knight's dancing when you have 5 seconds on the clock. That's where blunders occur. But for now, it's just about small plans of improvement, incremental improvement. Magnus loves playing moves like h4, putting a pawn on h5, closing a net maybe around the black king. I'm not saying now, but in the near future. First, he drops that knight back. He's going to kick away Black's centralized knight here. I'm hoping viewers at home can't hear, but there's someone vacuuming, hoovering just above me right now. And the whole queenside's been hoovered off the board in this game, but there's enough material, as you say, Tanya.
I can only hear the king side right now, David. So you're good.
Okay,
And
good.
knight e1 played. The one thing I want to point out is that the king on h2 and the king on h7 make sure that you're not walking into any forks. It's the safest spot for the kings. And with the knights on the board, that's exactly what you want to do with little time on the spot. You want to make sure that there are no checks around your king. So at least the players have managed to do that. For black, what you really want to try to aim is for as many pawn exchanges as possible. But if you want to keep your king safe, you're really not giving yourself the time to advance with the pawns. So it's a bit of a double edged sword trying to get the pawns off the board, but keep your king safe as well.
That's right. That's exactly the kind of the way one should be approaching this. Tanya, I just noticed below the board there, we see the players' accuracies. Imagine playing 97% accuracy against Magnus Carlsen, and you're still a pawn down, suffering, kind of begging for a draw in an endgame. I mean, that's just tough. That's that's how
It
difficult it can
is.
be.
It's a kind of position which Magnus will just play endlessly. But David, I have a feeling Vincent will hold this one. I think he's going to do it, and at least I hope he does because I want this to be a close fight. I think Vincent's been awesome in this tournament so far. He's been awesome in this game so far as well. G5, knight e6. The knights are closing in on the king right now. The rook can go over to the 8th rank. It's starting to get a bit tricky, and Vincent, with seconds on the clock, will need to be precise very soon.
He will. He starts with a very good move, a very logical move. The knights were stacked up there. It looked like Magnus had actually walked into a bit of a skewer, but no, Magnus's rook now closing in. I mean, that's a pretty pattern with all of these pieces, just cuddling up. Bit of a traffic jam in the center of the board there. But yeah, it's like an optical illusion, Tanya. It's like all these knights, all the jumps. How does Vincent relieve the tension? Okay, he steps back, just waiting. Maybe he's just saying to white, you can't improve. That's a bit of a weird one, though. Rook to e8. I don't really understand.
It's a strange waiting move, and you said what could be Winston's strategy. We were talking about pawn trades. The other thing that would be ideal for black is to trade off all the knights on the board. If this is a rook pawn endgame, 3 versus 2 is at that level, especially just a trivial draw. But the thing is, Magnus isn't going to let that happen so easily. He's going to keep as many of those horses on the board as possible. Rook e8, it's forced Magnus to burn a bit of the clock as well. And look at that. He's struggling to find a way forward.
Yeah, he looked frustrated there for a moment, Magnus Carlsen, maybe thinking that there will be more tricks, more tactics in the air. Actually, the more I look at it, the more I quite like this move, rook e8. It just steps away from any knight attacks. And Magnus makes a really committal decision. G4, he wants to simply improve the white king and then maybe push the h-pawn forward to break black's structure. But it does create some holes. And if the black rook were to ever get active now, the white king might be sweating. So Vincent here, maybe with some chances of a counterattack. But as you say, he wants the knights off the board first. That last move does break the coordination between black's pieces. Oh, the clock. Vincent under 20 seconds. Tanya, I have a bad feeling. I think we're going to see some weird knight tactics.
Knight tactics all over the board. Well, right now one doesn't work because you can't pick up that pawn on g5 and try to pick up the knight on f6 because the e5 knight is hanging. So Magnus instead breaks with h4. He's trying to create passes. He's saying, take that pawn. I want to get the f pawn rolling up the board. I want my g pawn going to g5 eventually. I think h4 was a really nice find. It frees the king from the bind on h2.
Yeah, exactly. And now you've created a pass pawn. The white f pawn, as you said, at some point might start rolling. And don't push it yet because there might be tactics, although I'm not sure that exactly works right now. Maybe you can push f4. And yeah, Magnus, at some point, he's going to wait till Vincent is down to 2 seconds. Then he's going to play like f4, g5. And you could see how difficult that will be to face. He does play it, Tanya. And it looks so loose for black suddenly.
And I think that's key, right? You wait for your opponent to have seconds to answer these difficult changes on the board. The dynamics are different. The pawns are moving forward. But he didn't do it when Vincent had about a minute on the clock. He does it when Vincent is under 10 seconds. And now 5, it's getting really tricky as long as the knights are on the board. Look at that. Vincent smartly keeping the coordination between the two knights, keeping his pieces defended. David, are we going to see g5?
Oh, I think Magnus would love to calculate a move like g5, but no time. And now knight takes f4. Wow, the knights are all hanging. What's happened here? Vincent spots a check. Oh, Tanya, this is genius by Vincent Keymer. He's actually giving up a piece, but he's going to eliminate white's last pawn. King takes knight now, would have been met by rook e4 and winning that white pawn. Rook and knight versus rook is a draw. Vincent saved it. That was incredibly fast. So clever from Vincent.
Can you believe it? He found that trick with 2 seconds on the clock, and it required precise calculation. Now the pieces are coming off the board, and it's a draw. This is going to be a stalemate at the end. Vincent survives. What a fight. Not an easy result. And we've got a match on our hands as game one ends in a draw. Really impressed by Vincent in this one, David.
Wow. Call it luck, call it intuition. Vincent found a really clever tactic that required 3 or 4 moves of foresight, and he did it with 3 or 4 seconds on his clock. Incredible defense there. I think 99.9% of grandmasters would have cracked under that pressure, buckled, and lost the game against Magnus Carlsen. But not Vincent. He stems the bleeding, especially from that 6-game streak at the end of the Grand Chess Tour. And Tanya, we have a match on our hands. Great result for young Vincent Keymer.
And that's exactly what you want, right? You start with the black pieces. You're playing against a dangerous Magnus, fresh from a big victory. You want to keep things consolidated with black at the very start. And Vincent was down a pawn. He did one of the hardest things to do in chess, hold a difficult endgame against Carlsen. And David, there was this one big moment that impressed us so much. A sharp, precise calculation by Vincent. And I think that was the turning point.
That was, and to explain that turning point, I'm going to show you my favorite browser. It's the Opera browser, where we're going to break down the key moments of that game. And if we jump in, this was the final position. It was actually stalemate to end it. But if we jump back, knight to d4 allowed Vincent Keymer just to pounce at this very moment and force the issue. It looks like the black knights are tied down, defending each other. Lo and behold, though, you can break this formation. Knight takes pawn, looking for forcing moves. It looks like this actually blunders a piece. Magnus was shocked here after rook takes f6, attacking the black knight. It looks like white is about to go up on material. There's no time to take the white knight, for example, but he had spotted Vincent. Really sneaky move here. A check. Knight g2, check. Drawing the white king as far away as possible from the white pawn. Now rook takes knight would have been possible, and was played, because if Magnus had taken this knight, rook e4 is a simple double attack. Attacking the white knight, attacking the white pawn. If you save the knight, this goes into a well-known drawn endgame. Even without the black pawn here, black is safe. Just pinning the white knight should eventually prevent any checkmating patterns. Rook and knight versus rook is a draw. So Vincent, with that tactic, was able to extricate himself. Look at this as well. Rook takes, knight to f5. He actually spotted that in this position, after king f4, he can even take the white knight, attacking the white rook here. And after a check, he was able to bail out into a well-known drawn king and pawn endgame. Incredible defense from Vincent Keymer. And everyone at home, go check out Opera. It's my favorite browser for chess. And for anyone who likes to play chess, bullet chess, like me at work, you can open things up on the sidebar. So Opera, I recommend it. That game was like an opera, Tanya, with so many crescendos.
It really was, David. That was sexy endgame play by Vincent Keymer, and a very sexy browser for all chess enthusiasts, and with Chess.com integrated on both mobile and desktop, it guarantees that the chess community is only a tap away. And don't forget, it's free to download. Use the command chess browser in chat, or visit go.chess.com/opera to take the Opera browser for a test ride. It's the first ever chess-themed browser in the world. I love the color, I love the green, and I'm loving the chess action we're getting. And it's a big test today for Vincent Keymer against Magnus Carlsen. But what a game he played in round one. He's ready to go. David, if game one was anything to go by, it's going to be a tough fight for Magnus. I think after seeing that, he's maybe not as much of a favorite as he was in my head at the start.
Yeah, I think, Tanya, this is the best kind of start that Vincent could have hoped for. As you say, getting first game in the books, getting a result, holding with the black pieces is important. Magnus still a favorite, of course. I think these long matches, the 4-game match really favors the higher rated player, just kind of greater margin for error. But Vincent, with 2 whites ahead, he's so strong with the white pieces. He'll start to believe. I think if he kind of avoids defeat in this next game, suddenly the confidence will start to flow. That Grand Chess Tour will be a distant nightmare, distant memory, and we'll have a real match on our hands. Look at him. He looks quite calm to me, especially after don't know how many hours of chess he's been playing. He looks composed, Vincent Keymer.
He really does, and I think it again gives you so much of confidence to know that you were able to hold that particular kind of position against an endgame maestro, and then you know that you're in the fight. This is not going to be a one-sided affair. And now Winston starts with one of the two whites for the day. This is round two. Uh, David, Vincent has this universal style, right? Uh, it's more anchored towards positional strategic play, and I think that's what we're going to see with his opening approach as well. Knight f3 on the board. Where do you think are his best chances against Magnus with white?
Yeah, I think it's in catching Magnus in the opening, first of all. I think if it's a strategic, technical kind of middle game, it's going to be difficult to outplay Magnus. Magnus, is he yawning there, Tanya? Is he having a nap? Is he just
It
trying to
looks like
remember
he's
his
about
opening
to
prep?
pass out.
I mean, understandable after the long day that both of these two players have had. But yeah, first of all, opening advantage. Vincent needs that. I think he needs to catch Magnus off guard. Magnus has been a bit vulnerable in the past to some kind of sudden tactics when he's just trying to maybe improve his pieces, just out of the blue when things suddenly strike. I'm liking what Vincent's doing here, a flank opening, keeping his options open. C takes d5 might be a threat. Ooh, Black had to take with the knight there because pawn takes would have allowed a knight b5 check and knight c7 tactic. But yeah, Tanya, it's going to be tough. He's just got to show killer instinct later. What do you make of this position, though? A bit unorthodox, at least.
Very non-standard, right? It's not something that we see very often, and the fact that he's gotten Magnus to think a little bit right out of the opening, I think that's a good sign. And Magnus there trying to get rid of some of the minor pieces, but that improves Vincent's pawn structure long term. Whenever d4 comes, it will be more control over the center. I like that bishop in c4, eyeing that pawn on f7 in many different situations. And Vincent goes for it immediately. He strikes in the center. Magnus defends that pawn. I like this opening outcome for Vincent so far.
Likewise, fully agree. I think this is actually a very Magnus type of position. If Magnus had the white pieces, Magnus loves having two central pawns against one central pawn. So it's level material, of course, but white with a very flexible center. I'm expecting him to castle. Maybe he's just pausing because black does have the option of closing things down in the middle now. But yeah, Vincent with everything to play for. Really nice pawn structure that actually arises with colors reversed from the Sicilian defense, from the French defense. And Sicilian and French, Vincent knows those very well. So I think he's in a comfort zone. He's caught Magnus out slightly, but now pausing. Yeah, just maybe I'm reading too much into it, Tanya, but the cameras, Magnus yawning, Magnus not looking too fresh. Vincent's got to use that.
He does, and he needs to take every single small opportunity that he gets in this game. David, I think the fact that he slowed down has exactly to do with the point that if you make the most natural looking move, Magnus is going to go for e4. And then suddenly we're talking about this knight from f3 getting displaced, the bishop from d6 getting super active. So Vincent has to take a decision right now. I don't think taking on e5 is on his radar because then you just solve all of black's problems yourself. You make your own pawn structure worse. And Vincent takes a very committal decision. He goes for e4 to stop Magnus from playing e4.
Makes a lot of sense, that one. Pawn to b5, an instant reaction from Magnus, Tanya. He doesn't want to even fight against the center. The white pawns are too strong right now. Magnus is playing on the flanks. Watch out for, if the bishop retreats, for example, Magnus in the near future striking out with a pawn to c5, maybe even pawn to b4 to undermine white's center. Yeah, I'm expecting Magnus at least a hint that he might try and break things down. Black is well developed after all, and black does have one strong hold, 1 foothold in the center. I don't know about you. I would pick white every time, though. I think this is the maximum you can hope for against Magnus Carlsen. Vincent has a nice but small, enduring advantage.
I completely agree with you. You've got good control over the center. You're always eyeing ideas on the queen side as well, trying to create weaknesses with a move like a4 at some point. It feels like once your rooks are connected, find a good square for that bishop. You can either come in with a tempo to g5 or immediately play bishop e3, but connect your rooks, bring them to the center. Magnus, meanwhile, playing the move rook to b8. And it's not the developing move that I had in mind. How do you explain that? What does he have in mind? Is it b4?
Maybe b4. Magnus is pausing. The lazy move that I would play is a6, just standard, just keeping the structure. But then white, after an exchange, will totally control the A file and might even enter with a rook to A7. Yeah, rook to B8 keeps his options open, but Magnus doesn't look too comfortable. He's quite a classical player, kind of at heart, when he's not freestyling, when he's not trolling people with his openings, Tanya. So I do believe he's uncomfortable against the center. Yeah, pawn to b4 is very committal though, because there might be attacks against the c6 pawn. Calculation suddenly coming into view. So I really don't like it for black. It just feels uncomfortable.
And I think Magnus is feeling uncomfortable. He's thinking after every move, and this explains the move rook b8. He sidestepped any pin on the a file, and Vincent keeps putting the pressure. He's again looking, I think, at the camera right there, checking out how Magnus is taking this position. A rook b1. I like every move that he's playing, and it just feels like the moves are very easy for white to make. Meanwhile, how is Magnus actually improving his position? Are you ever going to get c5 in? Because that's one of the key ideas to gain space. Is that something that you can think about with all the weaknesses on the queen side? I don't believe that's possible.
Yeah, I think he would love to get a move like c5 in. You're right, Tanya. That's normally black's source of counterplay, but that's why Vincent's been so clever. He's put a rook on b1, he's put a pawn on a4, and he's put a bishop on d3, just all ganging up against the b5 pawn. So if black ever wants to break out, it will come at a cost. Yeah, white just waiting. I wouldn't be surprised to see Vincent play like h3 himself, rook e1, just sit on the position. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's the most uncomfortable thing when your opponent has the positional advantage. There we go, h3. They have the center, for example. They just sit and they say, pressure's on you, mate. You need to calculate. I'm just going to slowly improve, wait, do nothing. It's just uncomfortable. And especially in rapid chess, that's really annoying when there's no obvious plan, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing that white has so many of these improving moves. He's played h3. Next, he's going to put the rook on one of these central lines, either line it up with the queen on e7 or line it up on the d file. And improving your position, meanwhile, you're asking, what does black want? How is black improving his position? Because you've kind of run out of all your ideal moves here. The thing that comes to my mind is a move like bishop b7, trying to get c5 in. I think at some point, Magnus has to find his activity. But when he does that, uh, it's it could go really bad for black with the pawn structure that we have in the center. So not easy to be Magnus Carlsen in this position right now.
Not easy to be Magnus, but he's channeling his inner Tanya Sachdev, I should say. Bishop b7 on the board. And I guess your idea is to pinpoint this e4 pawn, which is slightly under defended right now. 3 potential attackers on it, all indirect at the moment. But yeah, it's just really cagey. It's like these two boxers are just walking around, just looking at each other, sizing each other up. I'm expecting rook e1 and the waiting game to continue. Yeah, this is not what I expected, actually. I thought Vincent might be a bit more impatient in the opening. I thought he'd actually go more directly for Magnus, but yeah, the slow grind. It's yeah, really tense, really sophisticated position, Tanya. A good lesson for everyone at home. This is the opposite of caveman chess.
Vincent is Peter Leclerc's prodigy. His biggest strength is patience in possessions. He can play as slow as it takes to drive his opponent mad. And again, just driving your point home that it's easy for white to make improving moves. David, as black, I would be dreaming about c5, but with that b5 weakness, I'm just struggling to make it work. Help me find a way with black. How do you actually break open with the activity?
I'll try to find a way. I mean, it's not easy. One thing I should mention that Vincent shouldn't do is to take this pawn, because Magnus okay, he does play rook e1. I was going to say Magnus would love to actually take back with the c pawn. I've seen Magnus do this in various positions. I think 80% of the time, 90% of the time, players want to capture towards the center, but here capturing away from the center would open up that bishop you're talking about, Tanya. So Vincent doing the right thing, just waiting, and Magnus also just echoing that, just bishop back to a8. He's stuck for a plan. That's a sign that Magnus is a bit frustrated, but I mean, it's a position. You have to meet the needs of the position. Just the waiting game. It's not the mating game anymore. It's not about checkmate. It's just about waiting. And
Keeping the
yeah,
tension.
exactly. Oh, almost unbearable, the tension, though.
I made it work though. David, if white was to make a natural looking move like shift the rook from b1 to d1, then Magnus's last move suddenly makes a lot of sense, because now the rook defends b5, and I believe if you lose pressure on that b5 pawn, Magnus would love to get c5 in right now.
Yeah, this is a great call, Tanya. Suddenly, after a capture, Like you said, no pressure on this pawn, and yeah, suddenly the bishop comes to life. If you try and lock it down, if you try and block it in, black has to play c4 right now, simply to kick this white bishop away before white's able to push forward himself and establish the perfect bind. And suddenly, actually, black's doing pretty well here, Tanya. Bishop to c5, maybe knight to c5. Looks like you've got a nice kind of launch pad for your pieces. So yeah, it's awkward, but c4, Vincent's the one to launch the dynamite first. Wow. Talking of tension, central tension to the max. Which pawn to capture? A, C, D? Which pawn
Oh,
comes to mind?
too many decisions, and that's the worst case scenario for a chess player, especially when you got little time on the clock. You got to make up your mind, as you said, and then you have to also think about: do you want to allow white to capture in b5, creating weaknesses? Also, look at lines with c5 potentially coming in, the d pawn moving forward. David, I think I'm expecting Magnus to burn a bit of his clock right now. I think this is a critical moment, the first critical moment of the game.
Fully agree. And I love what Vincent's doing. This multiple choice question of which pawn to capture. I mean, it's not an easy one. Real exam for Magnus. And it's actually kind of what Magnus normally does to his opponents. He builds the center, he waits, he maneuvers everything into position. Then he strikes with moves like c4. Yeah, again, just I'm remembering games where Magnus has used this exact kind of strategy himself with a break like this. And I don't see where to start. I would look at capturing maybe this pawn first, but that would give black two isolated pawns, and I don't see the compensation for that. Taking on d4 only, there we go, it's actually played. I was going to say only activates the white knight. Watch out, knight f5, a huge threat. Tanya, we've got a real match on our hands. Vincent, so impressive.
Winston and driver's seat in this one. He's the one who's playing for the activity here. Bishop c5, the knight can jump in with an attack on the queen. There are potential sacrifices to watch out for on tender g7, h6 square. And I keep looking at Winston, and I think he keeps looking at Magnus on the camera. And I'm just wondering, David, is it easier to play a player like Magnus Carlsen online rather than feel his presence across the board in OTB?
I mean, he did just win 10 blitz games in a row, Magnus, against world-class opposition, OTB, when they could see the whites of his eyes, when they could see his body language, the kind of, yeah, where he could assert his dominance psychologically and with his moves. But yeah, online, I mean, I've played Magnus over the board and online. I would definitely prefer not to be sat opposite him. Nothing personal. He's a good friend, but I'd far rather not have that intimidation opposite me. I'll also mention to everyone at home, Vincent, as you say, keeps looking at his opponent, looking at the camera. You see the eyes darting off to a side. I've played Vincent over the board in some big games, one in the Grand Swiss, and he does the same. He kind of eyeballs you. He tries to make eye contact. He tries to stare down the opponent. It's scary. All these top players, they try to, I mean, they read your soul. So it's interesting how they get on online as opposed to that.
I know one great player that everyone in that time would have loved to play online. I think with Gary, you would just choose to play him online rather than feel his presence across from you. And right now, Winston does decide to take on b5. I'm expecting him to jump in with that knight to f5 once the trades happen. Or is it because you can't really get greedy, right, David, with the e4 pawn hanging, but Vincent goes for it. I thought
Vincent,
e4 was a weakness.
yeah, bit of a strange one, Tanya. Maybe he's calculated that he can at least temporarily win a pawn. The computer gives a question mark, and Magnus, okay, sneezes. I thought he was shaking his head there for a second, but yeah, knight f5. It just looks so tempting going for the attack. We'll see what Vincent has up his sleeve. I think he's going to take back with the knight. There we go. And yeah, indirectly, he does defend his pawn. So for now, it's 4 versus 3, Tanya. It's just like the other game. The whole queen side has exploded and disappeared. Hoovered off the board, as I would say. But yeah, it's all about whether white can keep the e4 pawn.
Are
What
you
do you make of
sure?
this?
Are you sure you're defending it, David?
No, I mean,
Is my
I'm just a
question.
lazy calculator. Show me. Let's dive in.
No, I'm not sure either because how the tactics work out. But I don't really see an immediate way for white to win a piece after bishop takes pawn. It looks really dangerous. But if you don't take the pawn immediately, you're down a pawn. And can you bust this variation?
Ooh, I'll try, but probably fail. I was planning to play bishop takes bishop.
Take it back with the knight.
Yeah, and then
Forced moves are
take.
easy.
Yeah.
Knight.
Yeah, I just assumed that I would pin and win, but you're right.
You
Probably
do pin and
nothing
win,
in
right?
here.
F3? Oh, queen b4 I've got.
Yeah. Attack, and black survives into a drawn endgame after, ooh, maybe not that move. Maybe, ooh, here there's some checks.
Ooh.
Oh, this is actually quite cool. There's a check, and then I take your rook next move. So this would
Yeah.
win, but wow, this is great calculation from Magnus if he can go for this after rook takes on e4, queen take, sorry, my mouse skills aren't the best, not as good as these players, but queen takes b5 would defend the rook. Tanya, at the end of this long line, so this is
Yeah.
5 moves each. Magnus has to calculate and evaluate all of that. Bishop takes e4, it's a 5-6 move variation. You're right,
And the
Tanya,
thing is,
maybe
right,
he should.
we would have taken bishop takes pawn, and if we see the bar rise up all the way, we know it's a blunder, we just go back. But for Magnus, he has to rely on calculation, and it's a very dangerous looking move to make. David, I think he's reaching out for his mouse just about now, and we're going to see his decision. Do you see what other alternative he could go for? Does he just simply try to defend a 4 pawns versus 3 pawns on the king side otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, Magnus, he's capable of doing that. A bit like Vincent defending the 3 versus 2 in the previous game between these two, but of course, no one likes to suffer a pawn down for too long. So your move on the board, Tanya, great call, great decision, and really, really accurate calculation by Magnus Carlsen. I think a good tip for everyone at home, again, when there's forcing moves, when there's a bunch of options, kind of captures all over the place, have to take your time like Magnus just did. He sensed the critical moment and he paused. Tanya, are you predicting a draw now?
If this works, then yes. If Magnus has seen it all the way through, then yes, because the 3 versus 3, there's nothing to fight for. And it really shows, it's so instructive in that critical moment to take his time, to slow down, to calculate precisely. And I think we're going to see this line being played out. David, I'm not going to lie, I didn't calculate it all the way through. It was just an interesting line to check out. And I think queen b4 might just be the key resource that you pointed out.
Yeah, and it's queen b4, but also seeing that you have to play queen takes b5 at the end of that line instead of trading off rooks automatically. Magnus kind of winced there. He was like, oh, it feels wrong, it feels shaky, but it holds. That's the most important thing. And knight takes bishop. What else could he be considering right now? Bishop takes
Bishop
d3.
takes bishop doesn't work.
No, rook takes queen. So bishop takes bishop on d3. White would take the queen and then win material. So you have to take back with a knight. Queen takes is the only other option.
But rook takes bishop. Isn't that rook takes bishop? Ah, then rook takes rook, David.
Yeah, there's some tricky tactics. What's Magnus going to play?
Queen takes bishop might be simpler. I like that option. And I think that's why he's slowed down. But he needs to make his decision quickly. He's touching the 1 minute mark. But David, I think if he chooses the right path right now, it's easy after this. So it's important for him to slow down at this very moment.
Yeah, 1 minute for Magnus, but if he finds the right moves, as you say, Tanya, it's an instant draw pretty much. But look at him on the camera. He looks really frustrated. He spotted a problem with what he planned and he blunders. Queen takes c5. Look at the bar. Wow.
Whoa! Magnus Carlsen making the wrong choice here. But what's wrong with it? Because it feels like there should be a knockout, that he should be losing material now.
Oh, we need that blue arrow to make an appearance. My first instinct was actually knight to c3, trying to just take this bishop, which is pinned. The bishop cannot move because the rook behind it is undefended. But after knight c3, if black wanted to bail out, maybe pawn to f5, and black would lose a pawn, but with a holdable position. Wow, I think we need a helping hand from our silicon friends here, the engine, because it looks fine. Vincent's struggling to find a refutation. I'm struggling to find the move. Wow, Tanya, I just turned on the engine for that 1 second. Guess White's winning move.
Oh my gosh.
It's so difficult. So difficult. Only one move wins for White. Queen to c4. I mean, what even is queen to c4?
You would have given me 10 minutes and I wouldn't have found it.
Wow. Tanya, do you think...
I'm going to be shocked if Vincent finds queen c4. David, but break it down to us. What's the point?
I mean, I've got to figure it out first. I guess the idea is that now you're threatening to take this bishop. And if the queens disappear simply, White would be threatening this nasty knight d6 move, which simply cannot be stopped. For example, black would love to defend his bishop, defend his rook, but knight to d6, maybe bishop takes f7 check is the key tactic. I've just realized now with the knight check, and at the very end, black's doing okay on material, but now white finally profits and wins the pinned piece. This is incredibly difficult. Vincent's down around the 1 minute mark. Look at him. He's literally trying to sniff out the position. He's trying to sniff out the winning move. He senses it, but he doesn't find it. Tanya, that was another level of chess. That's where computers thrive.
Too freaking difficult. If this was a classical game, I think Vincent would have found it. But with this time situation, this time control, knight c3, David, it was your first instinct as well. You know you're winning a pawn, right? That's the least you get out of the position. It's going to be a 3 versus 2. It is the human reaction. But wow, queen c4 was a golden opportunity. And the thing is, when you're playing Magnus Carlsen, you don't get too many of those opportunities. And when you get them, you better grab it.
Exactly. I mean, if Vincent goes down in this match now, he'll look back at this one opportunity thinking, oh, if I'd only had 2-3 more minutes on the clock, I might have found queen c4, but ultimately we cannot blame him. Some tactics, you can look back and think, that was findable, but this one, queen c4, a quiet move in a complicated position with loads of calculation. Silent but deadly, as they say. That was a silent killer, but now, Tanya, pieces disappearing. It's only a bishop versus a knight, only pawns on one flank, and knights are short-range pieces. This is where they actually thrive, right?
Exactly, and that's the key difference. If there was a set of pawns on the other side of the board, it would be dead loss for Magnus. But with the 3 versus 2, eventually the knight will give itself up for one of the pawns. But that's a far way off. The one thing that Vincent is aiming for is to trade off the minor pieces. So Magnus still has to watch out that there's no way that his knight gets trapped. David, if Magnus Carlsen was playing white in this position, I would say it's far from over.
You're right. Magnus is the master of maneuvering a bishop versus knight, just as Bobby Fischer was back in the day. He would always win these light squared bishop versus knight positions. But unfortunately here, you need pawns on the other flank. If, for example, there were a set of A pawns on the board, white would win this 10 times out of 10. But even the magical, mighty Magnus will not win this one. Look at how black set up a fortress here, Tanya. Really impressive. The black knight and the black g-pawn hold any entry squares. The white king is stuck. Wow. Can never step forward. And this is Endgame 101, textbook defense from Magnus Carlsen.
And he just keeps all his forces on the dark squares, which are opposite to a white's bishop. And now with one set of pawns gone, look how the knight on f6 and the h6 pawn. And again, the king, they stop any advance of that white king towards the h pawn, controlling all the key squares. I think it's more than enough activity. I just don't see how Vincent is making progress in this one. King g4, knight f6 back.
Yeah, and even if black were to give up the knight for the white f-pawn, that is a draw, as long as black's king races back to h8. We've actually seen that earlier today, right, Tanya? With the bishop and the wrong rook's pawn. So the h-pawn and the white bishop alone, not enough to win the game. It's all about whether black can hold the fortress or eliminate that white f-pawn. I think Magnus would draw this in his sleep right now.
He does look very sleepy right now, so we might just see that being played out, what you just said. F3, at least taking away some squares. You can't go back. Whoa!
Proving my point. Thanks, Magnus.
Magnus heard you. He wants to play it out, and he sacrifices the knight. The king will take the pawn. The h-pawn is the wrong color. All you got to do is march back to that h8 square, and this is a draw.
Oh, that was so unnecessary. That was so risky, but Magnus is Magnus. He's worked out. He was just in time by one move to get there. And we see stalemate. It's a draw. And second stalemate and a second draw of the day, Tanya.
Wow, you don't get to see that too often. It wasn't game one of these two players that we had a stalemate. And another one, Vincent Keymer really holding his own against the world number one. Whoever doubted Vincent at the start of the match, I think you guys need to reconsider all of that. Let's not forget their World Cup clash earlier. Vincent Keymer was the only player to beat Magnus Carlsen in the 2023 World Cup. Eventually, he lost that match, but got that first dub in. And so far, David, it's been a level match. And I think we might even see an Armageddon in this one.
Yeah, it's looking ever closer at this point. Both players extremely impressive in their defense. First game, Vincent was a pawn down, held the draw. Second game, Magnus was a pawn down and held the draw, ultimately cancelling each other out. Look at those accuracies on the side of the board there. Extremely impressive stuff. However, there was one missed opportunity for Vincent Keymer. He'll be kicking himself. It was in this position that Magnus Carlsen made his only real slip of the game. He had to capture this bishop with a knight. Perhaps Magnus was afraid of the move f3, which during the commentary we hadn't spotted. This does cause some severe difficulties to black along the e line. There's a pin here, but black is able to extricate himself with a really sneaky move. You cannot take this bishop because after a queen trade, you end up the exchange down. And actually at the very end, white is even able to pick up the black knight due to a pin. Instead, after f3, you need to be extra careful. And in this position, queen to d7, a really sophisticated slide. That's actually a triple attack against the white bishop, eyeing up the white knight as well. And at the end of this variation, black is keeping the material balance. Instead, Magnus, maybe missing this queen d7 resource, very easy to miss, of course, played queen takes c5. And this is where Vincent, understandably, retreated his knight back, trying to make use of the pin on the bishop. But after f5, Magnus was able to survive in the endgame. Instead, as we pointed out earlier, the most difficult move, maybe of the tournament, queen to c4, would have won the game for white. The black bishop is pinned. There's no f5 to defend it due to this pin along the diagonal. It's all the pins in this position. And as we mentioned, if the queens disappear, then suddenly knight to d6, such a big threat. And for example, bishop takes f7, an even bigger one. King takes another knight check, and eventually black's pieces are lost. Coordination all in white's favor. White would have won, but Vincent chose a more human approach, a more natural approach, and ultimately Magnus saved it. What a game. So much under the cover there in terms of variations.
And now with only 2 games remaining, the margin for error gets even smaller. It's been 2 draws so far, and as we go into a break, chat, it's time to draw your wands out as AnyChess brings you a magical new way to play chess. Its spell chess mechanics modify the offensive, defensive, and strategic dynamics of the game, adding layers to your gameplay that will change how you see chess entirely. Dive into spell chess puzzles and prepare for epic PvP battles with friends. To try your hand at AnyChess today, use the command AnyChess in chat or head to go.chess.com/AnyChess to play. And we're gonna have more play right after this break. We are at the halfway point of our winners final, and what a match this has been so far. In the break, we're gonna learn more about AnyChess, and when we return, will Keymer be able to take down the king of the Champions Chess Tour, or will Magnus make his way to another grand final? We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, welcome to my humble abode. Follow me. So we're here, we have the kitchen, clean as usual.
What's in the frame?
Yes, this is basically a gift from that I got for Christmas last year. It's simply cut out of the table when I was top of the Fantasy Premier League worldwide rankings in the good old days.
What's it like this year?
No, it's a little bit worse, but we'll get back, I'm sure. So if don't look at the TV, that shouldn't be there. It should be up on the wall. We haven't fixed that yet.
It's not $1,000 just then.
This board was bought at the local billiards shop because I realized at some point that I didn't actually have a chessboard. So I just needed to get one quickly, and it has. And so this is the board that I've been using for the last couple of years. Also, the clock isn't very good.
Can you show us your fridge?
Yes, sure. I am, of course, solely responsible for everything that's in here. It's a bit of everything. At the moment, it's been stripped a little bit. Like a couple of weeks ago, it was a lot fuller. And here there's a small freezer as well with some different goodies. So,
What do you usually eat when you're playing long tournaments?
you know, it's not that easy to eat a lot in between games, but sometimes I'll order something that I can eat quickly. Especially if I'm home alone, then I'll order something that I can eat quickly, like Thai or Chinese or something along that sort, and then I'll just use the 15 minutes in between games to eat as much as possible to get some energy.
Nice. So do you enjoy cooking?
No, but I enjoy helping with cooking. I can do the easy stuff like cutting the vegetables and then washing up afterwards. I'm pretty good at washing up, doing the dishes. That's something I'm good at. So that's what I'll do most of the time. So yeah, here's the bathroom where everything is clean. Blah blah blah. There was supposed to be somebody here, actually yesterday, to set up everything, but once again here everything's a bit provisional.
Nice view though.
Yeah, it's a decent view. Not the best in this weather, obviously. But you got this roll up. Funnily, this book is still here in the window. It's one of Gary's books, not in his predecessors actually, but on himself. What happened was that when I was playing the St. Louis tournament online, the Fish Random one where Gary was playing, we had to have a secondary camera to show the rest of the room. And so I had my phone here filming. I needed it to be a bit higher, so my phone was standing here and just filming me while I was playing over here. And I thought it would be a bit of a funny prop to use the Gary book against Gary, but I don't think he was paying attention to that. Also, it can be a little bit dark in here, and the desk is a little bit too small. So there's some work to be done here, but I think. For the tournaments where I'll be playing from home, everything will be fine. But so far, it's a bit provisional.
Vincent Keymer has been the immovable object in the match against Magnus Carlsen with two confident holds, two solid draws. First, holding a difficult endgame, then second, pushing an endgame where he's up a pawn. And what a journey it has been for the German Grandmaster in the Chess.com Classic, making his debut in Division 1 of the Champions Chess Tour. This has been their road to the winners final. Magnus Carlsen with wins against Velimir Ivic and Denis Lazovic. Meanwhile, Vincent Keymer taking down Alexei Sarana on day one, and then a huge win against Yantris Davduda. And he needed only 3 games to get the job done in both the matches. David, we've got a big one coming up with Magnus taking on the white pieces. What do you expect from their Game 3 fight?
Oh, it's a tough prediction. I expect Magnus to actually do something similar to what he did in Game 1. We saw the bracket a minute ago, Tanya. It must feel like Magnus is playing the World Junior Championship. He's he's played opponents, the average age is about 18, 19. It's incredible. And he does talk about his brand of anti-young player chess, where he normally makes it a bit slower. It's all about long-term pawn structures. It's all about kind of making big strategic decisions. But then again, that is Vincent's big strength. So Magnus, I don't think he'll take too much risk here. If it gets closer to Armageddon, I think he'll really fancy his chances there. But at some point, I wouldn't be that surprised if Magnus does make it a bit more chaotic. So far, it's really suited Vincent's strengths and Vincent's style.
Well, looking at that bracket that we just saw, right? If you forget all the head to head, all the stats, all the numbers on paper, it just felt that Vincent had a tougher road to get to the winners' final than Magnus did. And is it fair to say that he's actually been the more impressive of the two?
I wouldn't disagree with it. I guess in this type of knockout chess, you just got to beat what's put in front of you, whoever that is. So both players have done their job. They've done what's expected and being asked of them. But yeah, Vincent's been extremely impressive. And here we just see loads of moves rattle out. It's the main line of the Roy Lopez, the Spanish opening. It's the closed Roy Lopez. And yeah, this one, Tanya, a bunch of theory here. It's very well-known stuff, maneuvering positions. I'm expecting the white knight to slowly make its way over to the king side to sit pretty on the g3 square. That's the normal goal, the normal maneuver here. But Magnus, he's the master. He could be tempted to push a pawn forward to a5 to play moves like pawn to c3. What do you think? It's, again, a really slow line chosen by Magnus here.
It's a classic anti-young player chess, as he keeps calling. And these are exactly the kind of structures that get you the game, right? They start slow, they start cagey, but usually there's a pawn break in the center, either black getting in with d5 or white getting in with c3, d4, and then suddenly the position explodes. But the first couple of moves are always about just development, piece placement, thinking about what pieces you want on the board and off the board. And the first set of minor pieces comes off, and it's Magnus with the same pawn structure, the same pawn formation that Keymer had in their game one.
Wow, this really surprises me. This pawn structure, the doubled e-pawns you just referenced there, Tanya, it's like Marmite. You love it or you hate it. And Magnus clearly loves playing against it, as he proved against Vincent in game one. But now he's playing with it himself. So yeah, Magnus, full of surprises. I rarely see Magnus take on the doubled pawns, but here he's maybe going to put his rook back on f1. There we go. So he's actually lost a bit of time as well, Tanya. Really confusing stuff.
But I think that's a key move, because if we just flash back a little bit on our minds of what had happened in that first game, rook on the f file is the key square. It belongs there. It's done its job on the e file. It's a blocked future there. So regrouping, rerouting the rook to the open file. Now again, Vincent has to be careful of any sacrifices on that knight to f6. Magnus maneuvering the queen, potentially to a kingside square at the right moment. Queen to g3. Ideas of knight h4 come to mind to get rid of one of the knights, double up on the f file, and David, long-term plans of an attack against the Black King.
Yeah, long-term, the makings of an attack, they are there. But as we remember from the first game of the day, if Black's ever able to trade off the last set of bishops, not now, but if you're able to neutralize White's light squared bishop, that should also kind of quell the danger. But knight a5, big one-move threat, Tanya. A fork. Forktown on c6. How to step away from that? What are you predicting here?
And you would want to make a move like bishop to b7, but the thing is you don't want your bishop on that diagonal because you're biting against granite there. Not only the fact that white can trade, but that e4 pawn stops any activity. So bishop b7 would not be the move of choice, also losing connection to b4. And David, it's an obvious threat, but like you said, a big one. It needs to be stopped. And I'm trying to think of ways to actually counter it. Not so easy, because coming back, you've just put that knight to g6. Playing a move like knight e7 is not a happy retreat, and I don't think it's a human move at all to do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he could have gone back with his knight, but a bit ugly, a bit counterintuitive. He's had to play an equally ugly move, queen to e8. I thought he would maybe try and keep his queen there just to indirectly attack the knight later if you can move your pawn to c5. But yeah, the queen on e8 sits a bit awkwardly. Now the white knight is never easy to get rid of. And also, watch out, there might be exchange sacrifices in the air now that the black queen has left the defense of f6. And Magnus sets that up. Be careful. Rook takes f6 in any position, strategically, dynamically. It's terrifying, Tanya. Vincent, he's got to answer some serious questions right now.
I said long-term, a kingside attack by Magnus is being set up. I'm going to change that. I think it's super short-term. I think it's about to happen now, and Vincent has to take some difficult decisions. And again, the idea is to get your opponent to think early on so that when the critical decisions arrive, you don't have enough time to answer those. Vincent, he moves up with the king, and I think the point is that if Magnus was to trade on g6, David, I think he wants to recapture with the f-pawn so that he can challenge on the open f-file.
Definitely, Tanya. I'm just going to put this on the board. Knight takes g6. The last thing you ever want to do For newer players, and especially, at any level pretty much, king takes g6, your king's too far out in the open. Yes, you might be able to run back and flee to safety, but it costs so much time. So actually, knight takes g6, f takes g6 reminds me of a famous Spassky against Fischer pawn structure where, like in that game, double e pawns versus double g pawns, and it was actually much nicer for the side with double g pawns because the king has created the perfect palace around it. The perfect hiding spot. So this is something Magnus does not want to see happen. I mentioned another sacrifice, rook takes f6, but this, despite being aesthetically appealing, doesn't necessarily guarantee an attack. The eval bar says level, Tanya, so it's actually playable, this one. I guess you can slow build it, queen f2, just bring the rook to f1. Black's pawn structure is so badly ruined that long-term white has comp, as they say, compensation, but I don't think Magnus will go for that. I have a feeling he might instead just plant his knight into f5 and keep the tension.
That's actually really interesting. The fact that despite not having enough forces to put a direct attack on the black king, you play for these strategic concepts of destroying your opponent's pawn structure and long-term compensation. But again, rook takes knight would be such a committal decision of giving up the material that I think it's understandable that Magnus instead decides to keep the tension. He brings the queen forward to g3, always keeping the option open of sacrificing on f6, perhaps even preparing that further with a double up on the f line. Right now, Vincent has to recapture with the queen. Actually, it's not necessary. You could still go f takes e6 to try to open up the f file. And the more I look at it, maybe that's the move that you need to play here.
Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward decision. Queen takes looks like the most natural, as you mentioned first, Tanya. My mind went to that move first, but you do allow a white knight to sit on f5 for pretty much guaranteed for the near future, at least. Taking back with the pawn covers that square, but at the same time, there's some tactics. Okay, he has gone for it. And Magnus instantly trades everything off. Tanya, we're again in the endgame now.
It's endgame territory one more time, but to me it feels like with the symmetry in the pawn structure, and it's the kind we don't get to see very often, you've got 4 pawns on the e file, David. It's e6, e5, e4, e3. That's a crazy pawn structure. I think this should be fine for black. There are no apparent weaknesses. You're now hitting that knight on c6. If you give a check on e7, you might have just pushed your luck and there might not be any way back home from there.
Yeah, Magnus made a bit of a face on the camera again, not for the first time today. I think he wanted to give that check you mentioned. Ooh, he reacts, he retreats. He's just lost 2 moves, Magnus. I think if we jump in just very briefly, he wanted to give this check. That's why he was so frustrated, visibly. He wanted to give a check, walk in, and now kick the black rook away, assuming that if the rook moved, he could retreat onto this beautiful outpost on c6. But maybe he had forgotten that after a5, the black rook can use this square on b5. And like you said, no way home for this white knight. I'm not sure exactly how you get to it. Maybe it's just king e8, king d7, and munch on this trapped piece. So Magnus actually having to retreat. Yeah, the knight just came from here. He's only improved Vincent's position. I think Magnus is not playing for the advantage anymore, Tanya.
And you can tell that from the pawn structure. We have more space for black, full control of the center, and that knight on a5 suddenly feels like it's got no targets and is totally misplaced. It's not in the center of the board. What is it even doing there? Meanwhile, give black one more move and the c-pawn will move forward as well, gaining more space in that center. Are we going to see that move? Rook f3 does invite c5.
It does. I agree. If you can get c5, you normally want c5. That being said, maybe he's kind of prioritizing other things right now. It's also slightly tempting to play like rook e8. Hint that you might kick the white rook away with e4. There we go. I accidentally guessed. Shout out to that featured chat, by the way. I was going to say, as Doctor Strange said in Avengers Infinity War, we're in the endgame now. But Magnus is the one who keeps saying that in this match. Very niche quote out there for all the Marvel fans, myself included. c5, your move on the board though, Tanya. You're the prophet in this one.
Well, he's combined both ideas, right? I really liked your call of rook e8 as well. So he keeps it flexible. There are all these threats of pushing one of the 3 central pawns at the right moment. And once again, it's Keymer who's putting the pressure on Magnus in an endgame. Not a sentence that we get to use too often.
That's right. Oof, Magnus not happy at all. It just feels like the wind slightly out of his sails right now. Maybe it's the exertions out there in Poland. Yeah, I talked about youth being a factor. Normally when you've had a marathon day, I'm in my 30s now. I'm the same age as Magnus, Tanya. It's a struggle to play so many games of chess back to back without a break. Two different time formats we shouldn't forget. Yeah, not to take anything
Thanks,
away from
David, for
Magnus, but
making me feel like a complete fossil here.
no, that's not what I meant. Sorry, Tanya.
It takes. I
Oh,
mean, honestly, if you're 17 and not already at the candidates, you're too old for chess now.
exactly. I mean, might as well retire. Like, pretty much doing what I did. Just quit. Rook e3. Pawn sacrifice from Magnus, though. Maybe he's finding the energy. He's forcing himself to. Tanya, what do you make of the compensation for white here?
One of the big motivations for Magnus would be that if he wins today, he actually gets a rest day tomorrow. He grabs his spot into the grand final. And I think after what he's had in Poland, he would really need that rest day. So, for both these players who've played so much chess over the last couple of days, I think that's going to be crucial, David.
Oh, that's a great call. Normally, I think about these things at tournaments. I'm like, oh, that's future David's problem. If you're tired, you'll deal with it. But a rest day is like gold dust at this point for the players, all their dozens of games. So yeah, huge stakes in terms of the tournament, but also the luxury of a few extra hours sleep would be nice. Knight f5. I'm expecting Magnus to step forward now, block the pawn. There we go. Knight c4 is coming. Ooh, I was going to say rook d5 was coming, but black covers that. Vincent's playing so
Very
well,
nice.
Tanya.
So well. I love that move because if you trade, Black's knight gets this amazing spot on d6 where you control all these light squared weaknesses. The e pawn starts moving forward. And once again, Vincent has an extra pawn in this position. And David, this is not as equal as it was in the last game. I think this is really something for Black to play for. This can get dangerous and risky for Magnus.
Certainly can. Magnus, he needs to somehow pull himself together because he just gave up a pawn unnecessarily. Yes, things had gone a bit wrong before that, but I don't see the perks. I don't see the reason to have given up that pawn, and especially that last rook trade, as you mentioned, Tanya. Pass pawns are there to be pushed. There we go. He beat me to it. E4, and bring the black king now. Just looks like one-way traffic. It's actually interesting that all three endgames we've had so far, one side is a pawn up. Normally there's a rook and at least one set of knights on the board. But Magnus, it's all-out defensive mode for him, surely.
It's been a tough day, a tough match for Magnus against Vincent so far. And again, moves are easy for Black, so I'm slightly surprised that Vincent has slowed down before just bringing the king, improving the position for himself. King g6 to me also looks like a very natural move. But first, Vincent just reinforces the defense on that d6 knight. I was expecting king to g6. I think the other problem in Magnus's position is that knight on a5 just feels extremely empty. It might be time for him to start thinking about a way to reroute itself. Knight b3 came to mind, a different approach by Magnus with rook d1. David, do you think it's too early to go e3?
Ooh, it's tempting. They do say pass pawns are there to be pushed. Normally, going that far forward, away from the rest of your army with pawns, you need to back it up with tactics. So, yeah, I think he's calculating it, Tanya. E3, maybe if the king blocks, then trying to bring the knight forward to d4. It's very tempting. Yeah, I don't really like his rook e6, as you mentioned. It just feels a bit passive now, giving white a little bit of time to go pawn hunting. But yeah, still a 3-result game. I shouldn't write Magnus off too soon. Knight f5, and note how c3 did happen. So your idea, Tanya, on the board, e3 was threatened, followed by knight d4. Magnus cuts that out, but ooh, question mark. Rook f6, some threats in the air.
Setting
Ooh.
up some checks against the king. I don't really see a very tempting jump for the knight just yet. But David, you said a really interesting thing that it's a 3-result game. And I think if it was anyone else except Magnus playing white, you'd never say that. White's down a pawn. For the love of God. This has to be a 2-result game. It has to be either black draws or black finds a way to win. I mean, how do you not at least hold this against Magnus?
Ooh, true. I think I've played Magnus too much at Blitz. I could see him going like knight b3, taking the c5 pawn, taking the a6 pawn, and then winning. He's going to like have some tactic at the end to promote his a pawn, make a new queen. Watch this space if it happens.
Oh my gosh.
Rook d5 is coming. Like you say, Vincent should never lose control, but it is Magnus Carlsen.
Jumps back with the knight, retreats the knight to a really nice spot, taking care of the b2 square as well, attacking the c3 pawn. Vincent Keymer putting the pressure. Rook c1, king d2, both unhappy moves to make because you're kind of coming in the way of your own pieces.
Yeah, you're coming in the way for now, but king c2 will evict the black rook, kick it out of white's camp, out of white's half of the board. The white knight is now the MVP, holding those squares. You mentioned, Tanya, stopping the black knight from ever jumping in. Yeah, I quite like what Vincent's done, but it's a dead alley.
It would be absolutely insane if Magnus manages to turn this around into a win.
Oh,
I don't think I'd be able
dunno.
to. I mean, if that happens, is there any reality where you beat the guy? Well, right now, Vincent goes back, so he's threatening a rook trade, and that would be great for black. A check on d7, which has been sidestepped, so Magnus does invite a repetition. Says, well, rook b3, I don't think he'll go rook d1, but at least it sidesteps any trade, and e4 is attacked.
e4 was attacked and was duly defended. Yeah, the black rook's gone on a bit of a journey around here. He really needs to add the black king to the mix. He's kind of neglected to do so. Always bring the king forward in the endgame. Now, can Magnus improve while the black king is out and offside? I'm not sure what Magnus is going to try here. If he's feeling ambitious, he might try and bring his own rook in, but then you have to recce with the black pawn stepping forward with a check. Tanya, it just feels like something's about to happen. One slip in any of these endgames that we've seen in the three so far could be decisive, but maybe this is the one. Maybe we'll see some drama finally.
And the thing is, with just one more game remaining after that, that would be just decisive because it's so difficult to come back in the match if you go down a point and you're trailing with just one game on the board. So right now, Magnus takes away a key jumping square from that black knight, a threat that I was eyeing, knight h4. Would it put pressure on that white pawn? Also, now it's so much harder for black to get to the f3 square with the knight because you really want to just pick that knight up and put it on f3.
Yeah, I'm going to do some gymnastics here. The knight on f3 would be game over, but no path forward for it. So h5. Vincent trying to play Magnus at his own game.
Yeah, does he want to go g5, g4, h4, create another weakness, David?
Nice. I mean, what would Magnus do? He would probably do that too. So Vincent channeling his inner Carlsen. Rook b1. Rook's going active. It's coming in. Be careful. Do you want to shut the door on that, Tanya, or are you going with your plan? Kingside pawns, or are you going to stop that with rook e6?
Well, it does allow the rook to go further on to b7 as well. So I don't know how successful you are in trying to stop that plan. He first starts with a check. I think you have to stop rook to b6 somehow, or at least fight against it. You don't have time to go g5, g4, because there are weaknesses on the queen side to handle.
Yeah, this is tricky. The white rook is coming in. Just to mention as well, the black pawn stepping forward, I think, would step too far. White would switch back and pick that pawn off. Maybe that would be the way to guide this game towards a draw if Vincent started to feel nervous. That pawn wouldn't survive too much longer, but okay, could we see a repetition, Tanya? If white goes back with his king, we've seen that position before. Will Magnus try for more?
But if you try for more by coming in with your rook, then black starts pushing the e-pawn because then there's no way to really stop it from rolling further down the board. So I think rook b6, at least for now, has been stopped by Vincent. So Magnus comes back. Keymer could give a check on d7 and try for a repetition here. Or will he get ambitious?
Do you think he will?
The thing is, right, you have an extra pawn and you're playing against Magnus. You know you need to make the most of your chances, but you're struggling to find play. And he does it. He says, I want to keep the game going. G6 on the board. Vincent is trying to win this endgame.
Yeah, it's official. That's a really kind of nice move as well, just defending his knight from any tactics long term. But it's always satisfying, right, just to assert your authority over the opponent, saying, no draw for you. I'm playing for the win. Know your place. Get down on your knees. Beg for that draw. But, okay, king e2, e3. He's actually threatening rook e4 as well, Tanya. Not just mind games here.
David. Exactly. He's got a plan. If white steps in with the rook e4 is a very strong move.
Yeah, great play by Vincent. I was like semi-joking about playing for the win here, but he's going for it and with a purpose. Rook e4 looks really strong in this type of position. Maybe as well with h4 to come into the mix. Magnus, I think he's going to try and bail out into a rook endgame. If rook e4, he's going to try and get the knights off the board and move like knight to d6 potentially and seek safety in a rook endgame. Maybe he'll be safe enough there, but how can Vincent prevent that? How can he keep trying to win 1 minute on his clock?
You really want to keep the knights on the board, but clock's ticking low, and Magnus has ideas of his own. He wants to even think about going rook d3 and picking up that e3 passer. So how does Vincent keep everything under control? Keep the pawn alive, keep the knight alive. Rook e4, knight d6. How close is that to a draw? Because Magnus will remain down a pawn in that rook pawn endgame.
Yeah, it's just about the fact the white rook might be active enough and the black king is so passive, and that's why I love Vincent's last move, the black king. If it gets 2 more turns, it will actually run into the white position. There's really juicy meat over there. The h2 pawn, if it ever falls, white's position will collapse. So Magnus has a small window of opportunity. He's got like 2 moves before that black king comes in. d5 starts off with, now rook e4, and now it's a race, Tanya.
Oh my gosh, this is blowing up. Big threats on the board. G3 pawn cannot be given up, and if you take on h4, that at least allows Keymer to capture with his rook, targeting that h2 pawn, and the g pawn will be a big passer.
Yeah, the key variation here, after pawn takes pawn, rook takes h4, white cannot take this black pawn because the black rook goes back where it came from, back to e4. Okay, we'll see it actually happen on the board. Wow, you can't walk back into that pin surely, so Magnus runs with his king first, preempting. So now rook takes pawn. Ooh, could you get away with capturing this on e3?
I think
Okay,
you
first
can.
he steps across with his rook.
He plays it safe. Knight takes pawn, and the c pawn will be enough to give counterplay if black was to pin that knight on the 3rd rank with the move like rook h3. And also notice how you just can't start pushing that g pawn yet. f5 needs to stay defended. g5 is not an option. David, how can Vincent improve this position? I'm actually not finding a way, and knight takes pawn is coming up.
Yeah, you're right. I think he's just in time. It's so kind of near, but so far. Magnus has controlled everything. The knight controls the pawn. The knight controls the checking square on d2. The rook controls any advances. Like you said, holds the black knight. The king is just too far. If the king could land on f4 now, black is just winning. He actually comes in with his king. 17 seconds for Vincent, but I think he can safely take Magnus now. He is safe. Eliminate this pawn, eliminate the danger. Wow, it's not been easy for Magnus. Vincent's really asked some difficult questions, but again, Magnus has all the answers. Tanya, another draw maybe? And one step closer to Armageddon?
Vincent was up a pawn. He had a big shot in this one, but it's so difficult to actually convert a position against Magnus. He just makes it impossible. Magnus stepping up to attack that a6 pawn. Now Keymer wants to come in and give a check on d1, driving the white king away. So it might be time to actually pick up that e3 pawn before it's too late.
Yeah, I think I would. But Magnus, in the back of his mind, he knows that Vincent has 14 seconds left. Vincent did collapse multiple times in the Grand Chess Tour Blitz section when he had no time on his clock. Under 10 seconds. Magnus is playing for the win, Tanya. Watch out for what I mentioned earlier, the white a-pawn becoming a queen some fine day. Oh, but no. Eventually they do trade off knights, trade off pawns, and this should now be a relatively elementary draw.
I think we might even see a rook sacrifice eventually for the a pawn, and the g pawn and the king will be enough to hold that draw. And what a tremendous fight. Once again, we see all of that being played out. Vincent pauses for a moment, pushes the pawn. Might be time to take on a7 now, because you can even go g2. Or he pushes the king. You give a check. Rook takes queen. Pawn moves forward. This is a draw. That's a 3rd draw in a row. What a fight this is turning out to be, David.
Wow, we've had 2 stalemates, now king versus king, just 2 warriors who are balancing out, cancelling each other out. Yeah, just such high quality chess, Tanya. What can you say? Both players have brought their A game, despite surely the tiredness having some role to play.
Can you believe it? Just holding 3 endgames against Magnus. And in one of them, you're even down a pawn. But I have to say that in this one, David, it really felt like Vincent had a bit of a shot. He was up an extra pawn. There were pieces on the board. It might have been his opportunity. I think Magnus is more relieved with this result.
Yeah, definitely. Magnus is the happier of the 2. Then again, Magnus has black in the next game. Vincent takes the white pieces. Last time around, Magnus was struggling with black. So no safety here. Neither player can relax. It's now just a 1-game shootout with Armageddon potentially to follow. The players, yeah, at some point, these nervy endgames, surely there's going to be someone slipping up. But yeah, I'm just so impressed, Tanya. I can't say it enough.
I'm so
Just the
impressed.
level, just the consistency from both.
I feel you, and especially the fact that Vincent has lost 3 games in a row to Magnus over the last few days. You know, you're playing the champion of a tournament that you were fighting at, someone who dominated you in that tournament. But Magnus hasn't had a single real chance in this match so far. Kaima's really held his own in every single game, and sometimes done it on his terms as well. So that's 3 draws, and going into this final rapid game, the big question is how much risk are the players willing to take? Because it could either be the end of the match, or you say, you know what, let's take this down to the wire, let's go to the Armageddon. What do you think will be the approach?
Ooh, I mean, this young generation, Tanya, that's why I'm so impressed by them. I never ever see them take quick draws. I can't remember the last time I saw Vincent force a draw from the opening. I don't think I can recall any game that he's ever done that. So by taking risk out, maybe it will mean playing a slower type of position, but that walks into Magnus's hands. I think Vincent's just going to do his thing. I think we're going to get a full fight in this next game. Vincent knows maybe with the white pieces, this is his best shot, this next fourth game. Armageddon, Magnus is the king of Armageddon. Magnus is a speed demon, as we saw in Poland. I think Vincent should try and apply some pressure in this next one. It's his best shot. Why not?
Well, Magnus is the king of chess, David. So it's really, really tough. But you're right that Vincent gets the white pieces. So if he gets an opportunity, he needs to go for it. I'm predicting an Armageddon. I think this one really, the
Ooh.
kind of class that we're seeing by both players, the fights that we're seeing, really not giving any advantage. It's like nobody's giving an inch in this match. With the chess that we're seeing, it might be the clock that eventually decides who's the king today.
Bold call, Tanya, and I'm going to put you on the spot one time more. If it does get to Armageddon, who's the favorite? Who's going to take it?
Do you think anyone in their right mind ever bets against Magnus Carlsen in any format, in any time control? But David, I think it also comes down to what the bids would be, right? How low are you going to go for the black pieces? Because result odds are huge as well. And let's say this ends in 4 draws. And then you get the black pieces where a draw is enough and you've got enough time as well. Then, we're talking about random territory. And I think it could be anyone's match.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget that this is the longest streak that Magnus has had without winning a game in a while. 3 games where he's just been held to draws. I mean, not many people can hold Magnus to a draw in recent times in speed chess. So the longer that goes on, the more frustrated Magnus might get. We've already seen on the camera, Tanya, some reactions, some hints of tiredness, of frustration. So yeah, I don't think Armageddon will be that one-sided necessarily. I still think Vincent should go for it now, just out of honor, just so the chess gods kind of favor him later.
And the thing is, right, we've had 3 peaceful results, but it's not because of a lack of fight. So I think Vincent has been going when he gets the chances. Magnus has been going when he got the chance in the first game, but it's not been enough. The defense, the resilience has been absolutely world-class by these players. And I completely agree with you. I mean, on both of their minds, all they want is a little bit of sleep right now. But with so much on the line, that's still a far way off. And the big question is, will it hit Armageddon?
Ooh, yeah, I think we should dangle that prize in front of them. Who cares about money? Who cares about the winner's final? It's the rest day. They just want that sleep, as you mentioned, Tanya. That will motivate them. That will make them take some risk. But yeah, the next game incoming any moment now. 1.5, 1.5. I want to know what the fans think. Do they want Armageddon? Normally, I want more chess. Don't know about you, Tanya, but that feels like a fair way to decide it right now.
I want Armageddon, and are you kidding me? Of course the fans want Armageddon. We all love the Armageddon, and especially when you've got the bids involved, especially when you've got a fight like this involved, where both players are just showing their best chess. This has to go down to the wire, but Vincent Keymer plays the final game with the white pieces. Are you expecting another knight to f3 to start with?
Yeah, knight f3, it's become my favorite move, the Reti opening with age. I know Vincent is someone I look up to when I'm studying the Reti. He has all these weird, wacky plans, often relying solely on these flank strategies, not occupying the center with pawns. It nearly worked in the last game, right, Tanya? He applied some pressure on Magnus. Magnus didn't seem happy early on. Magnus was on his own, out of theory, a bit stuck for a plan. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think Vincent should do the same. And what about you? What are you predicting in these early stages?
I'd go with knight f3 or to start with d4, one of these 2 openings. I think we're going to see a repeat, exactly because of what you said, that he got a really good position in round 2, playing knight f3. So why not just repeat it? And also, given their mind state right now, and there we have it, knight f3 on the board, it's so difficult to get yourself to prepare a new surprise at this stage of the event.
Yeah, exactly. The players, I think the last thing they want to do is be studying theory right now after so much chess in the last few days. So yeah, why not keep repeating what they've been doing? And Magnus, first to pause. Look at that on the camera, Tanya. He was mulling over the options, and now he tries to transpose into the Queen's Gambit accepted. But this is different. The white d pawn still at home. Nothing to chip away at. And Vincent moves the e pawn for a second time. He's going on the attack.
And it forces Magnus to pause. Magnus taken by surprise here. E4, a committal decision, but it looks like Keymer has something up his sleeve because he keeps blitzing the moves. And we get a kind of a Sicilian position now, David.
Yeah, it looks that way almost. It looks like an open Sicilian where things have been traded off. Normally, black would have a pawn on d6, white would have a pawn on c2. Nice pattern recognition, Tanya. It looks really, it doesn't look like a Reti, that's for sure. But what do you think of this? Vincent playing super quick, but symmetrical almost, the pawn structure.
He keeps looking at Magnus in the camera. And I think Magnus is the kind of player, you've got someone like Hikaru. You can look at him all you want, but don't trust his body language. You just never know what you're in for. But I think with Magnus, you can get an idea of what's going on in his mind. Even though he's a great poker player, I've often seen in online chess, he doesn't exactly have a poker face.
That's right. Poker face is not one phrase you would associate with him. He's no Lady Gaga. He's poker face is not in his vocab. But I'm just surprised. Vincent's playing some weird moves, but he's playing them quickly. So Magnus, he's got to watch out. Vincent's clearly got a trick up his sleeve. Be careful here. Maybe bishop to b7 would walk into some weird tactics, Tanya, on the e6 square. What's Vincent got up his sleeve? It must be something a bit juicy here.
And he hasn't yet finished his development completely. So he still needs to spend one more move to go shock castle. Magnus needs to, meanwhile, watch out for that tender e6 spot that you're talking about. Although it still requires a little bit of calculation what's going on. If you don't improve your bishop, if Magnus doesn't play with the bishop, well, the c6 square has been taken away, right? How do you continue with development? And look at Magnus. David, he looks spent right now.
Yeah, I don't know where they find the energy, but Magnus, yeah, it definitely looks like things are getting
to him. It's on the board. It is on the board.
Wow. Pisak, Tanya, game 4. This is where it happens. This is where the explosions, the fireworks finally come to life. Wow.
I'm taking back my prediction of the Armageddon. Sorry, David, go on.
I was going to say, just justification for everyone at home. Pawn takes bishop. Let's show this. Knight takes is a fork. After the queen moves, the knight captures a rook. And okay, let's say black captures back. It's 2 pieces. It's bishop and knight for rook and let's say rook and 2 pawns. Who knows who's actually got the advantage here? Probably the player with the advantage is the one who's studied it before, clearly Vincent. And actually, this has happened. Tanya, Armageddon, distant dream right now. Vincent, if he continues to blitz out, do you think he's the one who's going to take this?
Look at the clock situation. It clearly implies that it's Vincent's familiar territory. It's the first time he's paused. He's thinking how to continue because you want to play Shah Castle, but right now the e4 pawn is soft. So you're trying to look at the lines. Is it possible for black to take on e4? There are all sorts of tactics with the d6 bishop on pre, with the potential rook from c1 eventually jumping to c8 after a trade on e4. Shah Castle comes to mind. A move like f3 is always so useful in these positions, David, because you blunt out one of Magnus's key minor pieces in the position.
Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I think f3 might be just the safest right now. Why bother calculating? Castle's knight takes e4, that variation you mentioned, when you can just avoid it, play f3 and castle on the next turn. But what's confused me the most, Tanya, is the fact that Vincent, clearly 14 moves of prep, he landed this sacrifice. Black reacts in the most natural way. And only now does he stop to think. I mean, the modern generation, they study with computers, right? They click the space bar. It's like, what's the computer's top choice? What's the computer's top choice? But they don't look at the second option or third option sometimes. But sometimes you just got to stop and think, what's black's most natural response? Magnus has played it. You got to look there as well. Is it superficial, Tanya, what he's been doing?
That said, David, there's so much to prepare against a player like Magnus. And then, this is the final rapid game. So perhaps for Vincent, he does have this in his preparation up till this point, feels like this position's fine. And kind of that's where it stopped. And then you're kind of thinking, do you want to go castle? I have a feeling we're going to see castle and f3 both appear on the board. I don't know which move order Vincent will decide to go for. I don't believe the e4 pawn is actually hanging with that knight on b8, the rook on a8, still not developed. That's taking a big, big risk for black. And I think Vincent is just deciding. Does he start with f3? Does he go shot castle? The big question is, how does he actually evaluate this position? How do you evaluate this material imbalance, David?
I mean, if I were writing a chess book back in the 1990s, I would just do that squiggly sign, the infinity sign saying unclear, and leave it at that, because that's how they used to evaluate every single complicated position. I think I would take black if I hadn't studied this before with either side, just because I find it easier to play with pieces rather than rooks and pawns. Especially, you can imagine the black knight coming out into the center, dancing around. Vincent eventually decides and plays f3. But then again, there we see Magnus plays the most natural move in the position, knight bd7, and the bar rises. That's how difficult this type of position will be. Surely Vincent will castle now. Tanya, who would you pick at first sight even?
At first sight, with the speed with which Keymer was playing, it felt like he knew exactly what he's doing. And the more I look at it, right, in this kind of a material imbalance where it's rook versus two minor pieces, you want to see activity. For white, you have enough open files for the major pieces to play. And look at that. Vincent doesn't even go for shot castle. And that's a bit of a surprise because it does invite the most natural move. And for a change, it is the best move in the position.
Yeah, weird stuff. I'm not sure what he was scared of there, Vincent, if he just castled, but Magnus not giving the check. The blue arrow appeared, as you said, Tanya. I mean, white just opened up his king on the diagonal. Why not throw in a check? Yes, knight e5 is a nice, pretty square anyway, but that was a one-off opportunity. Feels like it is the type of position. I think we can forgive the players. It's the type of position. Mistakes are inevitable. We're going to see this a lot. But yeah, strange decisions either way, nonetheless.
Strange. I want to answer your question. I actually think I prefer white here because, David, of the open files, the point that I was trying to make, and also I just realized this knight on e2 can eventually head to that f5 square, d5 as well. But once this knight lands on f5, that's going to be a bit of a monstrous knight to deal with.
Yeah, and if black has to play a move like g6 to cover that square, then all the dark squared weaknesses might start coming to the fore. So I agree with you. It's definitely scary for both sides, but I would say Magnus short-term scary. Vincent maybe a bit scarier if Magnus can coordinate everything long-term. First rook d8. Watch out, some tactics on the open file. What do you think? A dodge somewhere with the white queen?
100% dodge. You just cannot fall into tactics with this bishop. Although, after saying that, I don't really see a great square for the bishop to move to because the black queen and the king are also lined up. So bishop c5 is not really a move that works because white could simply capture it. But so tempted to move the queen. But where do you go? Because I was pointing out this f5 square for that knight on e2. Also watch out, the black knight could head to d3. Knight d3, it might even be possible right now, but Magnus first hits the queen with the move rook c8, not really letting Vincent stabilize his position.
Yeah, Magnus is playing super quickly ever since being surprised in the opening. I mean, it feels like Vincent, he landed the first 14 moves, so we've only had 4 moves in that time. He spent half his clock time on the last 4 moves, Vincent. It's not his type of position. We talked about styles earlier in the day, Tanya. Vincent, he's becoming more of a universal player, but I don't think he does too well in these really weird material imbalances compared to the likes of Duda or Dubov or Aronian. It feels like Vincent likes to have some element of control to know exactly what he should be aiming for strategically. Here, it's just really irrational, the type of position. So he's burning time on the clock. Magnus is far more universal in that regard. He can do anything, Magnus. 3 minute, the difference now. I don't think black actually wants to trade one set of rooks. You want to have every ice cream flavor. The rook is really important to help coordinate all of black's pieces. But he has forced the white queen to a weird square on b1. Tanya, surely the need for speed now for Vincent.
It is, which is surprising, right? Because he was the one who was up on the clock, and point well made there that Vincent's a kind of player who's always looking for cemento in the position. He's always looking for ways that things don't get chaotic. It's just his intuitive, instinctive style. To be one of the best players, and he's in the world top 20, you have to generally overall be ready to play all kinds of positions, but all players have an instinctive style. They have an intuitive style. When they've got less time on the clock, the decisions they make come down to that exact approach and style. So for Vincent, this is really not his type of imbalance, as you mentioned, but for Magnus, I think with ideas like the knight jumping to c4, I don't really see another way, David, to avoid the rook trade that you first mentioned you want to take control of. Knight c4 to me feels like the natural move. And where do you move the bishop? Because knight d2 is incoming as well.
Yeah, really good point here. Magnus is thinking, let's quickly show this tactic on the board. Knight c4 was Magnus's big idea. And if the bishop moves, I'm not sure which square, then knight d2 looks really scary. This is what Magnus was relying on. But suddenly there's a check and loose pieces do drop off. So after white plays a move queen c1, attacking this bishop, attacking the knight, unfortunately there's no time to take the white rook because check, intermediate check, and at the very end, white is 2 pawns up. That's why Magnus is thinking right now, his original plan not working out as planned, but yeah, he's not committed to it, I guess, Tanya. Knight d2 still in the air for later, but not right now. Will he move the rook again? What do you think?
You can move the rook and then start threatening that knight jumping on to d2, but white's got enough time then to even think about putting the other rook on the open d file. Magnus instead tries to trade off a key defender, a key attacker and a defender in Keymer's position, bishop c5. To me, David, this looks like a really nice move. You want to get rid of that active bishop, but of course our Silicon friend says none of that stuff, it's a mistake. Explain.
Well, Tanya, do you see the blue arrow on your screen? Queen a1?
Oh my gosh, stop. Just stop.
No. I give up. It's
Yeah.
time to announce my official retirement from chess. Queen a1.
Queen a1. What is that move? What is that move? I mean, that is the most ridiculous move I have ever seen the blue arrow suggest. And I've seen some ridiculous moves being suggested. Queen a1, not happening in a bazillion worlds, in a bazillion years. If it happens, call the arbiters.
Exactly. I mean, Vincent's never going to play that. No human plays Queen a1, even in a classical game with 5 hours on your clock, let alone a blitz game. But wow, knight takes e4 from Magnus now, blowing open the center. This is his idea. The white pieces are actually in a bit of a traffic jam over on the other flank, and the white king has been left on its own on the side. So, wow, we could see a queen landing on a1 anyway, Tanya. Knight sacrifice from Magnus.
What on earth? He's going to force white to play Queen a1. This is committal. David, Armageddon is off the cards 100% now.
Guaranteed, I think so, unless the players find a really convoluted way to equalize this. If the piece is captured, look at this. The queen is pretty much trapped. She's forced into the corner. We were laughing about this move, and now black would have multiple ways to continue the attack, but bishop takes g2, for example, blowing open the white king. The knight attacked. This is so unattractive for white, even if he can survive. Understandably avoided by Vincent Keymer. After knight takes e4, clearly a shock. He's reacted very quickly, actually, by playing b3. And wow, Magnus's horses are both under fire. Tanya, this is, yeah, I mean, this is new level chess. What to play even? Knight a3 comes to mind. Knight e3 maybe comes to mind. What a position. What a mess, first of all.
It's total chaos on the board. You mentioned the black horse is under fire. The knight on e2 as well is a hanging piece and can be x-rayed by that black queen on e7 with a knight move. A retreating move by the knight on e4 is not completely off the cards either. David, I just think this knight takes pawn by Magnus took Keymer completely by surprise, by shock, and that can really rattle you off when you have to face this kind of a move. And look at that. Magnus, he's kind of reacts in a way that he's not being able to exactly find the way. Like he's struggling to calculate currently.
Yeah, and I did see a featured chat quite a while ago, a few minutes back, saying, this is how you beat Magnus. You take him into a deep, dark forest and it just becomes random and it's a bit of a gamble. It's very high risk, but the only way you get any reward. So I totally understand what Vincent's doing right now. He went for this whole opening line, for example. So kudos to him. But yeah, Magnus, looking frustrated. I love your idea of a knight retreat. Maybe f6 is the safer square, just to stop the white queen ever poaching on h7. So you just retreat and you try to take this white knight on e2. That looks like the most kind of controlled approach. I'm trying to do some calculation about some knight jumps into d2. I'm sure Magnus is doing the same, but I mean, I think that white can actually take a knight on d2 and jump in with the white queen to f5 check, and that looks really terminal. The black king suddenly comes under heavy fire. So Magnus, he's got to get his head around all of this. 3 minutes each, Tanya. It's become so random. It's a 50-50. Magnus looks
And you can see
so
it.
annoyed.
You can see how difficult this position is to calculate for you. And David, this is the kind of position you want in a training exercise, given 1 hour and sit and calculate the whole line. Everything is hanging. I even forgot about the 8-7 pawn. That wasn't even on my radar that you pointed out. So it's the kind of moment that things can go wrong in one move, and Magnus goes knight e3, and apparently it's a great move to start with. Hits that rook on d1. The house is on fire right now.
Both sides, both of their houses are on fire, Tanya. It's the Tower of Terror, these 3 knights just stacked up. It's really reminiscent of the first game where the knights were dancing, jumping around, forks galore, forks all over the place. I did actually check while Magnus was thinking. Top move, knight e3. The top players, they always find the best moves with their back against the wall, even with the clock ticking. Vincent now has to do the same. It's a narrow path to hold the balance. The most obvious move, I guess, would be bishop takes bishop, just to trade things off. You're attacking the black queen, so there's no time for the black knights to keep dancing. Other moves might include just moving the white rook, but it's so crazy right now. Watch out for the black queen to start coming as well to join the attack in the near future. Who would you rather take, Tanya, in this messy position?
Black any day, right? Any day of the week, any day of the year, because it just looks like you're the one coming in with all those threats. Those knights look absolutely menacing. You said the queen joining into the party, attacking that g2 point. Meanwhile, black's king on f8 visually looks really weird, but is pretty safe for the time being. The good thing, the good news for Vincent here is that he's got time to burn right now. He can take his time, he can slow down, but it's such a difficult position to actually navigate through, and he makes a mistake.
He makes a mistake. I think this is maybe the safest option, but this goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Tanya. This is Vincent's instincts. Players, kind of their nature shines through when the clock ticks down. He just wants to get a position that he understands. That last position was so random, so complicated. He'd rather accept a slightly worse position here with white, where he actually knows what's going on, rather than just totally take a risk. And the reason I wasn't attracted to this is because, as the blue arrow is showing now, black simply wins the material back. It's level material suddenly, but black's piece is far more active than white's. You can imagine a black rook sliding down to c2 soon. There's a danger square on the g2 point. Queen coming to g5. White's queen is forced to a bit of an ugly, awkward square. This is all about Magnus and his bishops. They're raking across the board, Tanya.
Queen b2, I like it, because at first you think the bishop is coming to a3, but watch out for... I was going to say tactics, but then I realized it doesn't work, because I was going to fall for bishop takes pawn on g7, but maybe it does work, David. Maybe you can go bishop takes pawn.
Yeah, I'll quickly show this as Magnus thinks. He wants to keep his bishop pair alive. Bishops work best as a pair, of course. Bishop a3 is possible, because after bishop takes g7, it's important here. After queen takes bishop, Tanya, I guess you initially thought, oh, queen takes g2, but it is a check. So your instincts were right first time around. And a check, white saves himself next move.
I thought I just walked into a checkmate, but it does work for white, so everything's fine there. So bishop a3 doesn't work, then how do you keep the pieces? Because if you were to trade and neutralize the bishop pair, I think Keymer's doing well. Bishop takes d4, Keymer's super happy with that position.
Yeah, Magnus would love to keep the bishops. I just want to mention bishop back to d6 as well. There's still the same tactic of capturing on g7, because after the dust settles, after all those trades, the bishop would be vulnerable on that post. So process of elimination, the only safe square is actually b4 if you want to keep the bishops on. Magnus, though, he looks uneasy. He looks uncomfortable. Ooh, he plays the move.
Yeah.
Process of elimination.
The clocks are leveling out. Bishop b4, you find it, he finds it. Rook c2 coming in. It might be time to challenge on the c file. You can't allow the black rook to step into the second rank. David, that looks terrifying to me. Rook c1 is the move that I would play instantly, because I don't want to see your rook landing anywhere close to that queen.
1000% agree, Tanya. I think there we go. Vincent finds it. I was about to say process of elimination. This time for him, he has to find it. Both sides finding only moves. Magnus grimaces. He knows he's better. Magnus isn't risking much if he trades the rooks. But with the kings slightly vulnerable like this for both sides, there's still a lot to play for, a lot on the line. And Tanya, most impressively, over 90% accuracy for both players so far, despite how crazy this game has been.
And not just this game, this entire match has been so high on accuracy, and it's just been awesome to watch. And this has been a wild, wild position from the start. Now touching under 1 minute mark for both players. David, I know I said that Armageddon is off the cards, but it might be back on again.
Yeah, commentator's curse. As soon as you said that, I was like, "Oh no, Armageddon's coming!" I could just feel it. I didn't want to call you out, but I was like, "Oh, I've done it myself so many times, Tanya." But King G8. Okay, would you take this bishop? Ooh, he doesn't. He slides his queen across.
Queen F2 on the board. Bishop falls back, so you're definitely not taking that bishop anymore. Is bishop C5 something that you want to play here, trying to get more pieces off the board?
It looks very tempting. If you can, you should. If you can get the dark square bishops off. But yeah, understandably, Vincent wants to create a bit of breathing space for the white king. Some back rank tactics maybe were in the air, so he's now created some luft, as they say, some air. So yeah, bishop C5 definitely on the radar next. I think that's his plan. Magnus drops back. Bishop C5 still on the cards?
The only thing you need to watch out for is a potential pin on the C line. So I think that requires some calculation, and Vincent is playing on 15 seconds. He wants to get pieces off the board. He wants to neutralize the bishop pair, the big advantage. And look at that, Magnus stepping in with the queen, attacking that C1 rook. No time to pick up the bishop on D6 or the pawn on G7, because queen into rook comes with a check. Wow. Vincent sidesteps, there's a pin. This is getting crazy and out of hand once again. And
only one move.
Yeah.
He finds it though.
He find it.
Oh my god, Tanya. Wow, I thought Vincent was about to blunder, surely with 1 second left, but he gets the queens off. He was about to lose a piece. I thought that was game over, but wow, this is incredible. Both of them just bringing their A game yet again. Bishop pair though, Tanya, do you think it's enough?
With pawns on both sides of the board, it definitely gives Magnus some chances. And look at the way Vincent is trying to trade off as many of those pawns as possible. And he finds another tactics, and Magnus reacts because he missed bishop takes pawn. You take that bishop back. Knight F5 comes in. The D6 bishop falls. And I think Keymer has escaped one more time, David.
Oh, Magnus, yeah, it's always these one move tactics. It's always the knights jumping around. Again, it's still only Black who can win. Black has created a passed a B pawn of his own. But the fact that there are so few pawns left means that Vincent should be able to get the draw now. The white king is going to come over to that flank. There we go. It's going to make its way over to eventually block the B pawn. Tanya, you're right. Magnus simply missed it. He didn't need to rush. The more pawns on the board, the better his chances would have been.
David,
but now
his clock.
Oh my god.
He's making moves with under a second.
Every time. Literally every turn. Wow.
Oh,
it's like Title Tuesday now. It's just a race to the finish with barely any increment. The Black King's coming. Vincent's not out of the woods yet. And he offers to trade the bishops.
But the knight is too far. The knight is too far. The king shoulders the white king. The B pawn is coming. Magnus Carlsen knows it. He leans back for the first time in the match. He knows he's done it.
Wow, heartbreak from Vincent Keymer. He traded off the bishops, which was so desirable the whole game until that moment. And eventually the black B-pawn wins for Magnus. Oh, what a game, Tanya. So many twists and turns, so many... I mean, how do you even describe that game? Just a titanic battle.
And Magnus Carlsen, once again, he's done it. Last round, last chance, and last second. And he gets the win in. He wins the win.